I'll never forget the moment my phone buzzed on the table that night. We just cut the cake and folks were laughing, clinking coffee cups and passing paper plates. My old army buddy Ray was telling a story about the time we got caught in a snowstorm outside Dayton when I picked up my phone and saw the message from my only son. "How's the cake, old man?" I spit in it. I stared at those words lit up on the screen, and for a second I swear my heart stopped beating. The laughter around me faded into a dull hum, like someone had shoved my head underwater. I set the phone down real slow because my hands were shaking. That was my birthday gift from my son. But before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back a little, because nights like that don't come out of nowhere. They build brick by bitter brick until the whole wall comes crashing down. My name's Frank Delaney. I was born and raised in Lima, Ohio, though I've lived in Springfield for the past 25 years. I'm 69 years old, widowed, retired from the Ford plant, where I worked nearly 4 decades, tightening bolts and grinding my back down to dust. Folks say I'm the kind of man who doesn't complain much, who shows up every day and gets the job done. I guess that's true. When my wife Marlene passed away 10 years ago, the only thing that kept me from falling into a hole was my boy Darren. He was 30 back then, and I thought, well, at least I raised him right. At least I've got him left. But children aren't always what you think they'll be. September evenings in Ohio carry a little bite in the air, enough to remind you summer's over. I had the windows cracked that night, letting in the sound of crickets and the smell of cut grass. My dining room isn't anything fancy oak table. I built myself back in '85 mismatched chairs because half the set broke years ago. Yellow curtains Marlene sewed when she still had her sewing machine in the corner. I'd spent the day cooking chili, baking cornbread, setting out pitchers of iced tea. My neighbors Carol and Jim brought over potato salad. Ray showed up with a 6-pack of Budweiser like always. Even little Ellie, my granddaughter, came. She's 9, full of freckles, with Marlene's eyes. The one person missing was Darren. I'd invited him, of course. Sent him a text 2 weeks ahead. "Simple dinner at the house, bring Ellie if you can." He never replied, which was his way. Darren had grown into a man who always kept me guessing whether I was worth his time. Still, I kept a plate ready for him. You don't stop hoping not when it's your own flesh and blood. We lit candles on the cake, a white sheet cake from Kroger, with "Happy Birthday, Frank" scrawled in blue icing. Folks started singing, and Ellie's voice carried the loudest, which warmed me more than the flames ever could. I leaned down, blew out the candles, and thought, maybe 69 isn't so bad. Maybe tonight's all right. That's when the phone buzzed. I should have ignored it. Lord, I wish I had. But habit made me look, and there it was, Darren's message. "How's the cake, old man?" I spit in it. The words punched me harder than any fist I ever took in a bar fight. For a second, I wondered if it was a joke, some kind of sick humor. But Darren didn't joke like that. He liked to cut deep, to twist the knife and watch me bleed. And in that moment, with frosting still on my lips and Ellie reaching for another slice, I knew he meant every letter. I didn't say a word. I just swallowed hard and set the phone down. Ray must have noticed my face drain because he leaned over and asked, "You all right, Frank?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, Ray, just fine." Inside, I was anything but fine. Let me tell you something about getting old. You think the worst is behind you. You've buried parents, buried friends, maybe even buried your spouse. You think there aren't many surprises left, but betrayal that still cuts sharp no matter how many birthdays you've stacked up. And betrayal from your own child that carves into you deeper than a blade. I sat there watching everyone laugh and eat, pretending nothing was wrong, but in my chest a storm was gathering. I wasn't going to yell, wasn't going to curse, wasn't going to let Darren pull me down to the mud. No, I was going to let him destroy himself. Because sometimes revenge doesn't take a hammer. Sometimes all it takes is holding up a mirror. And that night I had the perfect mirror sitting right there in my hand. So while Ellie licked frosting from her fork and Carol passed out second helpings, I lifted my phone again, turned the camera on, and snapped a photo of the whole table. Everyone's smiling mouths full of cake. My neighbors, my old army buddy, my granddaughter, every last one of them. I looked at that photo, then back at Darren's message. And in that moment, a plan settled in my mind as clear as day. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about letting everyone see him for who he really was. I kept that phone in my hand longer than I should have, staring at those words like maybe they'd rearrange themselves if I blinked enough. But they didn't. "How's the cake, old man?" I spit in it. The rest of the room carried on like nothing had happened. Ray's booming laugh bounced off the walls. Carol's voice floated from the kitchen asking Jim if he wanted more potato salad. Ellie was humming some tune from school as she swung her legs under the table. I sat in the middle of it all, a knot of ice forming in my chest. You'd think a father would get used to disappointment from his son. Lord knows I'd had my share with Darren. Missed birthdays, unpaid loans, harsh words over the years that never seemed to heal. But this one felt different, crueler. It wasn't just neglect anymore, it was deliberate humiliation. Darren was born in '82, back when the world seemed brighter, and Marlene and I were young and in love. He came into the world red-faced and hollering, and I swore I'd protect him with my life. I worked double shifts, skipped vacations, patched up hand-me-down shoes just to make sure he had what he needed. I thought sacrifice was enough. Turns out sacrifice doesn't guarantee gratitude. Somewhere along the way, maybe after Marlene died, maybe before Darren hardened into someone I barely recognized, he talked to me like I was a burden. He borrowed money with no intention of paying it back. He sneered at my old truck, my modest house, my plain clothes. But through it all, I kept forgiving, because that's what fathers do, or at least that's what I told myself. That night, though, sitting at my birthday table, forgiveness felt like ashes in my mouth. Ellie leaned across the table and asked Grandpa, "Can I have another piece of cake?" Her small voice snapped me back. I cut her a sliver, forced a smile, and slid it onto her plate. Watching her dig in frosting, smearing across her cheek, I felt the sharp sting of Darren's words even more. Because Ellie deserved better. She deserved a father who showed her how to treat family with respect. Instead, she got Darren. And I got a text that made me feel like less than nothing. I slipped the phone into my pocket, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't want to ruin the night for the folks who'd come out just to make me feel loved, but inside my mind raced. What kind of man spits in a cake meant for his own father? And if he didn't really spit in it, if it was just a sick joke, was that any better? Ray leaned over again, studying me with those sharp old soldier's eyes. "Frank," he said quietly, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I gave him a half smile. "Just tired, Ray. You know how it is at my age." He nodded, though I could tell he didn't buy it. The truth was, I wasn't tired. I was humiliated. And humiliation has a way of hardening into something else if you let it sit too long. When the plates were cleared and the last crumbs of cornbread had disappeared, the group drifted into the living room. Ray turned on the ball game. Carol helped Ellie with a puzzle on the coffee table. I stayed behind in the kitchen, standing by the sink, staring out at the dark yard while cicadas buzzed. I pulled the phone back out, read the message again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Should I reply? Part of me wanted to fire back, to unleash every ounce of pain I'd bottled up over the years, to tell him what kind of worthless son he'd become. But I didn't, not yet. I took a deep breath, the kind that rattles in your chest, and whispered to myself, don't give him what he wants. Because Darren wanted me angry. He wanted me flustered, broken, small, and I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I started remembering. I remembered the time Darren was 15, and I caught him sneaking beer from the garage fridge. Instead of grounding him, I sat him down and talked to him about responsibility. I remembered when he crashed Marlene's car at 21, and I drained half my savings to pay for the damage, telling him everyone deserves a second chance. I remembered when Marlene passed, and he didn't even come to the hospital until the very end, then cried louder than anyone else at the funeral, as if grief could erase all the years he'd been absent. Every memory tasted sour that night. Every sacrifice I'd made seemed like fuel for his cruelty. And I realized something: forgiveness had turned into permission. I'd been giving him permission to treat me like dirt. That was over. The longer I stood there, the more a plan began to form, quiet and steady, like a seed cracking open under the soil. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let Darren condemn himself. He'd already written the sentence, those 9 ugly words in that text. All I had to do was show them to the right people. And I knew exactly when and how to do it. When I walked back into the living room, Ray tossed me a Budweiser. I caught it, cracked it open, and sat down in my recliner. Ellie looked up at me, eyes wide. "Grandpa, are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm fine, sweetheart." But in my mind, I wasn't fine. I was sharpening the blade of silence. And before the night was over, Darren was going to feel its edge. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that anger burns fast and leaves nothing but smoke. But patience, that's the fire that smolders, the kind that can bring a man to his knees without you ever raising your voice. I sat in my recliner that night pretending to watch the ball game with the others, but my mind wasn't on the screen. My mind was on that text. Those 9 words sat in my chest like a nail driven deep. "How's the cake, old man?" I spit in it. Over and over I heard them. They tasted like bile. I took a slow sip of beer and let my eyes wander around the room. Ray leaning back with his boots half off. Carol humming softly as she sorted puzzle pieces with Ellie. Jim chuckling at some joke on the TV. And all of them, every single one, had eaten that cake. That was when the idea came to me, not like a lightning bolt, but like a steady dawn breaking through. Let Darren condemn himself. Let his own words be the noose. Sur tuturum, de one. I excused myself, saying I needed to stretch my legs. I walked back into the dining room where the remains of the cake sat on the table, crumbs scattered like confetti. I pulled out my phone, angled it just right, and snapped a picture of the half-empty plates and frosting streaked forks. Then I stepped into the living room doorway and caught everyone mid-laughter. "Hold still a second," I said, raising the phone. Ellie grinned, wide missing teeth on display. Ray held up his beer can in a mock toast. Carol and Jim leaned close together, smiling. I clicked the shutter, capturing that moment of warmth, of trust, of people enjoying themselves without a clue about the storm brewing. That photo wasn't just a snapshot, it was a weapon. I stood there, phone in hand, heart beating heavy in my chest. All I had to do was attach that picture to Darren's text and send it right back to him. He'd see that everyone had eaten the cake. And then they'd all see his message too. But timing was everything. If I showed them too soon, it might look like I was overreacting. If I waited too long, the sting might fade. No, I needed the moment to land when it would cut deepest. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and sat down again, forcing myself to breathe slow. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about control. And control is something Darren had taken from me for years. Every time he called me old man with that sneer, every time he ignored my calls, every time he made me feel small in front of others. Well, tonight I was taking it back. Esta Missouri Kurum, Wertherum. The party wound down around 10. Folks gathered their coats, pressed my shoulder with kind words, and promised to stop by again soon. Ellie hugged me tight around the waist before Jim and Carol let her out. Ray clapped my back and said, "You're tougher than nails, Frank. Don't forget it." I locked the door after they left and stood in the silence of my house. The tick of the old wall clock sounded louder than ever. The half-empty cake stared at me from the dining room, its frosting smeared and candles melted down to stubs. That was when I finally did it. I pulled out my phone, opened the message from Darren, and pressed the little camera icon. I attached the photo I'd taken of everyone smiling around the cake. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a second. Then I typed, "They all ate it," and read your message. My finger hesitated only long enough to feel the weight of it. Then I pressed send. The whoosh of the message leaving my phone felt like the crack of a gavel. It was done. I didn't expect an answer right away, but it came fast within seconds. "What the hell, Dad?" Darren wrote. I let the phone buzz in my hand. Another came. "You didn't show them, did you?" Then another. "That was a joke. You're overreacting." I stared at those messages, calm settling over me like a blanket. He was panicking. And for once, it wasn't me stumbling over words or begging for understanding. It was him. I didn't reply. Silence is its own kind of reply. I went to bed that night with my phone still buzzing on the nightstand. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I lay back on the pillow and let the weight of years lift from my chest. It wasn't the kind of revenge you read about in books. No shouting, no fists, just truth laid bare. But sometimes truth is sharper than any blade. And Darren was about to learn that the hard way. Amari Uamwam. The next morning I woke to a flood of notifications. Dozens of texts, missed calls, voicemails. Darren begging, cursing, flipping back and forth between rage and desperation. But what he didn't know not yet was that I had every intention of showing that message to everyone who needed to see it. Family dinners, neighbors, even Ellie's school if it came to that. Because Darren had crossed a line. And I wasn't going to erase it for him this time. Not anymore. By the time the sun crept through my blinds the next morning, my phone had already buzzed itself halfway off the nightstand. Darren had left 14 voicemails, half of them laced with curses, the other half with weak apologies. Dad, it was just a joke, come on. You're gonna ruin me over this. You're pathetic. Please don't tell Ellie, she won't understand. The messages swung like a pendulum from arrogance to fear. I didn't answer a single one. Because I knew the right time to answer wasn't in the middle of the night or the gray of dawn. It was when the world was awake. And the world was awake that Sunday afternoon. Suwern, Surma. Every month or so, my neighbor Carol hosted a little get-together in her backyard, potluck style. Folks from the block came by with covered dishes, kids ran around playing tag, and old-timers like me nursed paper cups of coffee while swapping stories about busted lawnmowers and the price of gas. That Sunday, I knew most of the same people from my birthday would be there, including Ellie. When I arrived with a pan of baked beans, Carol hugged me at the gate. Frank, I'm still full from that chili you made last night. Lord, it was good. I thanked her, set the beans on the picnic table, and scanned the crowd. Ray was there holding court under the maple tree. Jim was already setting up horseshoes, and Ellie, sweet Ellie, was sitting cross-legged on the grass with her friend braiding doll hair. But Darren wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. That was fine, he didn't need to be. Because his words were already in my pocket. Attorney Winnerin, Surstorna. I mingled, made small talk, even laughed once or twice. But my mind stayed fixed on the moment I knew had to come. I waited until people had eaten, until plates were stacked high with ribs and potato salad, until laughter was easy and loud. Then I stood up from the picnic table and cleared my throat. Mind if I say something? The chatter died down. A dozen faces turned toward me. Yesterday was my birthday, I began, and I just want to thank all of you who came, who made it feel like I wasn't alone. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Ray lifted his cup in salute. But I continued, my voice steady. Something happened last night that I think you all deserve to know, because you were part of it whether you realized it or not. I pulled out my phone. Every eye followed. Hunarinawan Sorno. I opened Darren's message, held the screen up high enough for folks to see, and read it aloud. How's the cake, old man? I spit in it. Gasps cut through the air. Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Jim muttered, Jesus Christ. Ellie froze where she sat on the grass, eyes wide and unblinking. I let the words hang there a moment, heavy as stone. Then I swiped, showing the photo I'd sent back to Darren, the one with all of them smiling, eating the cake. And this, I said quietly, is what I replied. They all ate it and read your message. Silence, thick, unmovable. Then Carol spoke, her voice trembling with anger. He did what? Ray stood up so fast his chair tipped over. That boy ought to be ashamed, spitting in your father's cake on his birthday. Hell, Frank, that's lower than low. I nodded, swallowing hard. I don't know if he really did it or if it was just to humiliate me. But either way, you all deserve to know what kind of man he's become. Who your sister was, Western? The reaction spread like wildfire. Folks whispered, shook their heads, cursed under their breath. Carol's cheeks flushed red. That's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Jim spat into the grass. A son talking to his daddy like that? No respect, none. Ellie got up, slowly walked over and tugged on my sleeve. Grandpa, did Daddy really say that? I knelt down, put a hand on her small shoulder, and looked her in the eyes. Yes, honey, he did. And it was wrong. Her lip quivered. She looked away silent, but I could see the hurt in her face. That was the hardest part. But sometimes truth hurts more than lies, and hiding it wouldn't protect her forever. The gathering never quite recovered. People kept talking, but the laughter was gone. You could feel the shift, the way everyone looked at me with sympathy, and at the empty space where Darren should have been with disgust. And I'll admit, a part of me felt guilty. Like maybe I shouldn't have dragged everyone into it. But then I remembered all the times Darren had dragged me down in front of others. The smirks, the insults, the dismissals. No, this was his doing, not mine. He wanted to spit in my dignity fine, but now he had to taste his own venom. That night when I got home, my phone buzzed again. You told them, didn't you? Darren's text read. Yes, I typed back. They needed to know. His reply came in seconds. You humiliated me. I stared at the screen, then slowly typed back. No, son, you humiliated yourself. And with that, I set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and let myself breathe easier than I had in years. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one carrying the shame. He was. The days that followed that chaotic birthday were the quietest my house had felt in years. There were no more texts from Josh, no angry calls, no sudden knocks on the door. Just silence. And silence can be both a comfort and a warning. I took advantage of it. I knew I couldn't just let things drift. I had shown him the first sting of consequence that night, but real change, real reckoning would take more. I owed it to myself, and I owed it to the people who loved me enough to sit at my table while my son tried to spit on it. So I started planning. First, I made a list. A real pen and paper list sitting at the kitchen counter with my morning coffee. It had 2 columns. Things he's done. Things I can do. Under things he's done, I wrote out every memory that hurt. Every broken promise, every manipulative stunt, every time he twisted my words or played the victim. I filled the page front and back. I needed to see it laid out to remind myself I wasn't being dramatic or unfair. Then I shifted to things I can do. That list took longer. I didn't want revenge just for the sake of payback. I wanted a reckoning that was honest. I wanted to show him and everyone else the truth. I thought about church on Sundays. I thought about the Kiwanis Club I used to belong to. I thought about the neighbors, the old friends from work. This town wasn't big and people talked. If Josh wanted to humiliate me, then he needed to see what humiliation really felt like. One idea kept circling back in my head: a family gathering. Not just family, though. Bigger, community-wide, something that felt wholesome and welcoming, but with one sharp twist at the center. So I called Martha first. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful as always. Martha, I said, I need your help. She must have heard something in my tone because she got quiet fast. What kind of help, Harold? I want to host a barbecue, a proper one. Invite the family, the neighbors, some of the folks from church. But I want it to be more than just food. I want it to be a stage. Martha didn't ask for details, not right away. She knew me well enough. All right, she said. If this is about Josh, I'm in. But Harold, just promise me you're not going to hurt yourself chasing after some kind of revenge. I don't want to hurt him, Martha, I said, my jaw tight. I just want him to see, really see. Next, I called my brother Earl. Now, Earl isn't the sentimental type. He lives over in Indiana, retired mechanic, tougher than shoe leather. He answered with his usual, "What's wrong, Harold?" You don't call unless something's wrong. I told him about the text, about the party, about everything. Earl let out a low whistle. That boy's a damn fool. Always was. But if you've got something cooking, I'll drive out. I do, I told him, and I'll need you here. Over the next week, I worked like a man half my age. I bought new folding tables. I borrowed a big tent canopy from the church. I even rented an extra grill from the hardware store. Martha came by with boxes of paper plates and napkins. Earl rolled in on Thursday with a cooler big enough to hold half a cow. The invitations went out the old-fashioned way, phone calls, word of mouth. I wanted everyone who knew Josh to be there. I wanted the stage set wide. But the most important part of the plan wasn't the burgers or the potato salad. It was the display. See, Josh loved to act like history didn't matter. He'd sneer at the stories I told about our family, about the things we went through just to survive. He wanted to erase it, rewrite it, so he was always the victim and I was always the tyrant. I wasn't going to let that stand anymore. So I gathered evidence, old photographs, letters, a few emails I'd printed years back, things he'd sent me when he was desperate for money, calling me the only good man in my life. I even had voicemail recordings saved on an old answering machine in the garage. I set it all up in a neat display board like a school project, only deadlier. Martha helped me organize it by years. Earl suggested we label it with a big bold title, The Truth About Family. When I looked at that board, I felt something inside me settle. This wasn't just payback. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I had loved my son and he had spat on it. The night before the barbecue, I sat alone in my living room with the display propped against the wall. The clock ticked loud. My house smelled like charcoal and marinades. My hands trembled just a little. Tomorrow, I whispered to myself. Tomorrow he'll see. They'll all see. But in the quiet, a thought pricked at me. What if he didn't show up? What if he stayed away too proud or too scared? I shook my head. No, Josh was many things, but one thing he couldn't resist was attention. If he heard people were gathering without him, he'd come storming in just to prove he still mattered. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. Let him come. Let him swagger in. This time I'd be ready. The day of the barbecue broke warm and bright with the kind of September sun that still carried a hint of summer, but whispered of fall around the corner. I was up before dawn hauling coolers of ice, marinating chicken, and making sure the big tent was staked down tight in the yard. By noon, the smell of charcoal smoke curled through the neighborhood. Folks started showing up carrying side dishes and pies, waving hello like it was any other get-together. But this wasn't any other get-together. Not for me. Martha manned the drink table, smiling, that steady smile that calmed everyone. Earl stood by the grill flipping burgers like he'd been born with a spatula in his hand. Neighbors drifted in, Mr. and Mrs. Keating from next door, Pastor Lewis from church, even old man Donnelly from the VFW. By 2 o'clock, there were close to 40 people milling about, laughing, talking, sipping sweet tea, but my eyes kept drifting to the street, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. Josh pulled up around 2:30 in that beat-up black Ford he'd driven for years. He got out, slow sunglasses on, strutting like he owned the place. My stomach twisted when I saw him, but I forced my face neutral. Dad, he called loud enough for half the crowd to hear. What's all this? You throwing a retirement party or your own funeral? A couple people chuckled nervously. Martha shot me a glance. Earl's jaw clenched. Neither, I said loud enough to carry. Just a family barbecue. You're right on time. Josh smirked and swaggered over, grabbing a plate and piling it high. He shook a few hands, acted like he was the guest of honor. But I saw the way folks avoided his eyes, the way the conversations dipped when he walked by. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. After everyone had eaten, I stood up by the canopy. My heart hammered like a drum in my chest. I cleared my throat and the chatter quieted. Friends, family, I began, my voice steady. I want to thank you all for coming today. I know it's just a simple barbecue, but for me it's something more. It's a chance to speak plain about family, about love, and about truth. Josh rolled his eyes. Here we go, he muttered, but people hushed him. I gestured to Martha and Earl, and they brought out the display board we'd built. They set it up right in front of the crowd. Heads craned. Conversations died to silence. This I said, tapping the top where the bold letters read, "The truth about family is the story of a father and a son. A father who tried his best, and a son who decided that wasn't enough." Josh laughed high and sharp. Dad, what the hell is this? Some kind of science fair project? Sit down, Josh, I said. My voice cut like a blade. For once in your life, just sit down and listen. Something in my tone must have reached him because he actually sat arms crossed, glaring. I started from the beginning. I pointed to the photographs, me holding him as a baby me, at his high school graduation, the fishing trips we took out on Lake Erie. I played one of the old voicemails, his voice crackling through the speaker. Dad, I'm in trouble. I know I don't deserve it, but you're the only good man in my life. Please help me. The crowd stirred. Eyes flicked from the board to Josh, whose face had gone tight. I showed the letters he'd written me from college thanking me for paying his tuition. The birthday cards where he scrawled, "Love you, Dad," before money made him bitter. And then I brought out the phone. I'd screenshotted his birthday text, "How's the cake, old man?" I spit in it, and printed it on a big poster board. Next to it, I taped the picture I'd sent back of everyone smiling around the table. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Martha covered her mouth. Earl muttered, "God damn." Josh shot to his feet, red creeping up his neck. This is a setup, he's twisting it. But I raised a hand and the murmurs hushed. Josh, I said, my voice steady as bedrock, I didn't twist a damn thing. These are your words, your actions. You wanted to humiliate me on my birthday. You wanted to spit on everything I've given you. Well, son, now everyone sees the truth." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Josh looked around desperate for a friendly face, but all he saw were eyes filled with disappointment. Pastor Lewis shook his head slowly. Mrs. Keating muttered, "Shameful." Finally, Earl stepped forward. He jabbed a finger at Josh. "You got no respect. Not for your father, not for yourself. You want to spit and cake, fine. But today you ate your own words." The crowd murmured their agreement. A couple even clapped. Josh's face crumpled with fury. "This isn't over," he shouted. He threw down his plate food scattering across the grass and stormed toward his truck. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, surrounded by friends and neighbors, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. The truth was out. The humiliation was his to carry, not mine. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe easy. The yard grew quiet after Josh's truck rumbled away, dust hanging in the late afternoon air, like the last word of an argument. People shifted, unsure whether to stay or pack up. But then Martha clapped her hands and said, "All right, who wants pie?" Laughter broke the tension, soft and nervous at first, then warmer. Folks drifted back to the tables, kids ran across the grass again, and Earl went back to flipping burgers like nothing had happened. I sat down in my lawn chair, exhaustion washing over me. My body ached, but it wasn't just age. It was the weight of years finally lifting. For so long, I'd carried Josh's anger like it was my cross to bear. But that afternoon in front of everyone, the burden shifted. People saw him for who he was. And more importantly, I saw myself for who I still was, a man who had tried, who had loved, and who refused to be mocked into silence. Later, after the guests left and the last cooler was drained, I sat alone under the canopy. The sun was dipping low, staining the horizon orange and pink. Martha came over, setting a hand on my shoulder. "You did right today," she said. I nodded, felt like the only thing left to do. She smiled sadly. "It won't fix him, Harold, but maybe it'll free you." That stuck with me. Free me. She was right. Revenge wasn't about breaking him down. It was about reclaiming myself, about refusing to be his punching bag anymore. That night, the house was quiet again. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the good kind I'd been saving, and sat by the window. Outside, the yard was littered with paper cups and crumpled napkins, the remains of a battle fought and won. I thought about Josh. I wondered if he was sitting somewhere stewing, cursing my name. Maybe he was. Maybe he always would. But for once, that wasn't my concern. Instead, I thought about the faces around that table, the neighbors who stood by me, the family who drove miles to help, the friends who clapped when the truth finally rang clear. That was my real inheritance. Not bitterness, not shame, but love that stayed when it mattered most. And I realized something else, something I hadn't let myself believe in a long time. Getting older doesn't mean weaker. It doesn't mean irrelevant. Sometimes it means you've lived long enough to call out lies for what they are and still stand tall when the dust settles. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of bourbon, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. If Josh ever came back to me one day, humbled and ready to change, I'd hear him out. Because a father's love doesn't just vanish. But until then, I'd carry on, surrounded by the people who mattered. And maybe that was the sweetest revenge of all, not bitterness, not payback, but peace. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe someone you love has hurt you, mocked you, made you feel small. If so, let me tell you this, you're not alone. You don't have to carry their cruelty in silence. Stand up, speak your truth, live your life with dignity. And if my story gave you even a little strength tonight, I ask just one thing. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, you know what to do. Subscribe, stay with me, and let's keep walking this road together. Because revenge isn't always about striking back. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your voice, your pride, and your peace.